Okay, well, first of all, Katie, thank you for joining us. Let's start with basically what impact does this trial have emotionally on communities across the country, including our own community?
Well, as we all know, this George Floyd's death has it really came at a time where this was already a social issue that was sort of boiling over, and so it has placed such a spotlight on this social justice issue of police brutality. And so, regardless of which side you find yourselves on, I think that people have a strong opinion about it. And so, when you have a city like Minneapolis that's so similar to Indianapolis, it is a metropolitan city in the middle of a Midwestern state. And so, we can really connect with them as a community in that while the majority of our police force here is white, the majority of people that they encounter tend to be people of color. And so I think that we as a community have to be watching, wondering, and waiting on how the decision here will impact things that go on in our own community. So I think that there's a huge emotional investment regardless of which side you find yourself on.
And you've been on the prosecutor side, you're a defense attorney now. What would be an ideal juror in a case like this?
Well, as cliche or textbook as it sounds, I think a juror with an open mind. I think that we can all agree that the news has been saturated with coverage of George Floyd's death. And so, but that can work both ways. That can hurt either party. It can be beneficial to either party, because what you do not want as a prosecutor on this case or defense attorney is for individuals to come in with their mind made up. You truly want them to hear the evidence and make a decision based on what they hear in court. So the ideal juror for either side is going to be one who can honestly agree to keep an open mind.
How big of a deal will the ruling about George Floyd's criminal history, his criminal past, be in this case? And we're expecting the judge to make that decision this week, hopefully.
Well, I think that too could be a big deal for either side. While it is the defense that is offering that evidence, I think that it could cut both ways for the defense. Judge Cahill has already decided back in January that he's not going to allow this jury to hear all of George Floyd's criminal history and every wrong thing that he's done. George Floyd is not on trial here. And so the narrow issue that they're deciding now is whether or not that 2019 arrest that draws similarities to the arrest that ultimately led to his death in 2020, if it is similar enough to make it relevant. And so what the defense is saying is that because it involved the ingestion of drugs, because it involved a medical episode, that it goes to the issue of the day, which is, did Derek Chauvin cause George Floyd's death, or was there some other cause? And so the defense is alleging that their intent is to draw those similarities to show that his death could have been caused in the same way before. But I think that they have to be careful with that, and that if I were the prosecutor sitting on the other side of that evidence, I would say to the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this all may be true. However, the difference is in 2019, Mr. Floyd did not die. The difference is this time, when he may have ingested drugs, this time he had a knee on his neck for 9 minutes. And so I think that while the defense believes that evidence to be really beneficial to their position, I think it could actually hurt them, honestly. So I think either way, that decision is going to be significant.
We were all surprised about the $27 million settlement in the civil side of this case. What impact do you think it could or would have on the criminal trial itself? And would you be concerned about that at all in this case?
I would be concerned as a defense attorney. I would. That civil settlement was settled with Mr. Floyd's family and the city. And the city is Derek Chauvin's employer. And so ultimately, his employer has said, we take responsibility for the actions of our employee, and we agree that he was at fault to the tune of $27 million. And we heard from the juror that was excused when he was asked whether or not that affected his perception or his ability to be fair and impartial. And he said, well, you know, the ticket on it, the 27 million, I think specifically he said, had it been 2000, I may have not thought much of it. But the 27 million said to me that they thought something really wrong happened here. So I do think that the timing of that is pretty damaging to the defense. But On the other side, it could be damaging to the state as well, because it could go to the defense's argument that while there may have been a tortious action that led to George Floyd's death, it wasn't necessarily criminal, and that's already been settled in a civil court. So again, I think that's another thing that cuts both ways.
How probable is this trial to start on time, and would a delay be good for either side?
Well, it appears to me so far that Judge Cahill seems really intent on getting this to trial on March 29th. Are the delays last week that we saw as a result of deciding which charges the jury would hear? I thought for sure there would be a continuance that would set this case out months. And so to have something such as prejudice or bias created as a result of this settlement exposure, I really do not think he's likely to continue it. But on the other hand, I think that it would be prudent to do so, because regardless of what he decides, even regardless of what he decides in terms of whether or not George Floyd's prior criminal history comes in, all of those issues, his decision is not final. And so these attorneys want an opportunity to take that to a higher court. And I think that it would be prudent to allow the attorneys to flush those issues out now, as opposed to dealing with it on appeal later. And so I understand time is of the essence. That's a community that needs to heal from all of this. But I think that it would be prudent to be sure that all of these legal issues that could really affect this case, that they know about ahead of time, to go ahead and let those get worked out, even if it's an appeal to a higher court. So based on what we've seen so far, I think we're full steam ahead. I mean, March 29th is not that far away, but I guess we'll just have to see what we see going forward, because it's important to also understand they're also asking for a change of venue, which is not a frivolous request under these circumstances, especially with news of this settlement. And so it's hard to tell, but he seems pretty intent on moving this forward in a timely fashion.
One last question, Katie. What would you say to Hoosiers about their emotional investment in this trial and how to react to it? The verdict could send shockwaves like the homicide itself did across the country and into communities who were not prepared to deal with, something so tragic.
Well, I think that the emotional investment and the emotions that have arisen in all of us as a result of this are healthy. We have seen some very healthy changes come about in our society as a result of putting a spotlight on this. But what I would say to our community is to educate yourself. I know the trial all day, but it's important to watch news coverage such as yours to make sure that we are educated about what we see, because regardless of what the outcome is, someone is not going to be satisfied. And so if you want to effect change as a result of that outcome, you have to be educated about what went wrong. So stay in tune, stay informed, but also remember, it's one thing to be emotional, it's another to act erratically based on that emotion. And if we truly have an agenda that we want to affect generations from now, we have to do it in a way that our positions, whatever they are, will be respected.